My heart pounds, as though it is about to explode in my chest. What have I just experienced? I swallow a slug of whiskey to calm my nerves. Shaking, I slump in my armchair as I process tonight's events. Can I make sense of it? What madness has overtaken me? As my pulse calms, I close my eyes, inhaling deeply. Today began as any other. I live alone in a cottage that sits near the summit of a valley between the moors. Autumn Valley is well named. Once summer is over and the farmers end their harvest, the trees that line the slopes provide a spectrum of colour before they shed their leaves as the cold winter arrives. I have lived in my cottage for many years. My home is old, and although updated with extensions and modern features, it retains its old-world character with wooden ceiling beams made of oak and leaded sash windows. I don't mind the solitude. Just a single path winds its way down through Autumn Valley to the village where I stock up on supplies and any other business I have with the outside world. I make sure I leave my home every Friday night to visit the public house on the outskirts. The Ram's Head is as old as this cottage. This represents my total human concept during my week, but it is enough for me. The locals have news and stories and gossip to keep me entertained. This afternoon, I leave the stone walls of my home, closing the hardwood door behind me. I notice the tiles on my roof sagging a little. I'll need to get that looked at. But it is hardly surprising when I consider that my home was built in the 17th century. For it's still to be standing at all, even the often wild environments of the surrounding moorland, is a miracle. This particular Friday arrives overcast and breezy. I wear my long overcoats and boots to make my way down the path, through the wood, towards the village for my evening's libations. I also carry a stick to aid my walking, although I needed more for my return journey, back up through the valley, as night meant I had to pick my way almost blindly through the exposed roots and rocks that littered the path. At this time of day, though, as late afternoon passes into twilight, the descent through the trees feels pleasant. The inclement weather enhances the natural beauty on offer, and as my booted feet walk upon a bed of browning leaves, above me seems to glimmer with golden boughs creaking in the wind. The path I follow meanders and is well worn, despite my house being the only property in this valley. I surmise that countless feet had followed my own in the centuries prior to my habitation. As I walk, I anticipate my night at the Ram's Head. The old pub had served the community dating back prior to the Civil War, and I had spent many a happy night whiling away the hours amongst the villagers. I slipped little on the downslope of the path, the composting leaves from the wood slick, but my stick aided my traversal. I emerge from the valley, and I step upon the tarmac road leading to the village. A short walk later, I cross the stone bridge, glancing down at the river rushing through, fed from the countless brooks and streams that thread through the moors. Just over the bridge sits the Ram's Head, and I enter through the creaking double doors. Laughter and chatting voices a welcome sound. The landlord, standing behind the bar, nods a greeting to me as I take up my usual spot on a stool at the far end. The tap room has low ceilings, covered in the traditional horse brasses and paintings of the local moorland landscape. The bar itself bristles with pumps, and the landlord, knowing my order, pulls me a pint of the local craft bitter. I thank him and raise the creamy froth to my lips. As the evening progresses, the pub fills up. The villagers and those just passing through gather to celebrate the arrival of the weekend. As autumn sets in, the night arrives quickly, but the gentle lighting in the pub, along with the sounds of merriment inside, keeps the darkness at bay. I am on my third pint when I spot a familiar face. Sitting on his own, in the corner, is an old man that we regulars simply know as Wilf. It's difficult to assess his age. His wrinkled face sits rigid at all times. He never speaks to anyone, but comes here every Friday like myself, nursing a point of mild, standing on the table in front of him. I often wonder what his story is. A few drinks in, I decide to find out. I order a pint of mild, and the landlord obliges with raised eyebrows, surprised at my decision to speak to Wilf. And as I approach his small table, the old man fixes me with a stare of consternation and confusion. "I got you a pint," I say, handing him the drink. I take a seat opposite. Wilf stares at it suspiciously, as though I intend to poison him, but then takes a sip. He nods, seeming to accept my gesture, and I settle down to get to know him better. "You live in that cottage at the top of Autumn Valley," he says to me, as though it was an accusation. "I do," I say, taking a sip of my own drink. "Do you know it?" Wilf snorts. "Aye, I know that place. Don't know why you choose to live there, though." "Why not?" I ask. "It suits my needs. It's a beautiful old cottage." "I dare say," says Wilf, and he looks into his pint, moodily. I begin to understand why people leave him be. "What's wrong with my cottage?" I ask. "You know nothing of the history of this village, then," said Wilf. "Not much? But why should I be concerned about that?" "Because you live in the house of the Autumn Valley Witch," he says. I almost spit out my beer. Stifling a laugh, I look at him with my eyebrows raised. "The Autumn Valley Witch? Don't mock me," grumbles Wilf. "If you know what I know, you'll get out of there." "And what do you know about this witch?" I ask. "Seems you need a lesson in history," says Wilf before proceeding. 400 years ago, this village was established as a farming community by the Puritans. They built a church, and the village grew around it. This pub was a barb because they wouldn't allow drinking or any kind of debauchery. Up on the moor, a widow lived alone as they moved in, and watched the community as they chopped down the trees for building and firewood. She lived off the land, and the woods in the valley were hers. She gathered mushrooms and herbs and tracked rabbits and birds for food. When she complained to the village about them destroying her woods because she didn't accept their church, they accused her of witchcraft. They took her, and on the stone bridge, strapped her into the ducking stool and then lowered her into the river. When she escaped and swam to the bank, they grabbed her, as they believed that the devil had intervened in her punishment, and they found her guilty of being a witch. They took her into the woods and hung her from the large oak in the centre. It was autumn, and the trees were shedding the leaves, but as they strung her up, she swore her revenge, and at the moment of her death, a wind whipped up, and the oak shed all its leaves at a single whirlwind. That's why it's called Autumn Valley. I listened to Will with interest, but also increasing skepticism. His tone of voice, deep and spooky, no doubt intended to be more melodramatic. As with most local myths, the story will be embellished over time, adding elements to make it more mysterious and frightening. "I don't believe a word of it," I say, almost laughing. "I've lived up there for years. I'm sure I would have seen any witches flying around on broomsticks or brewing potions at the giant cauldron." "Don't mock me," insists Wilf once again. "Only when the time is right will she come. Tonight is Friday, the most wicked day of the week. The moon is full tonight, just as autumn has arrived, and the trees are now shedding their leaves." I humour Wilf for a while, now understanding why the village tended to leave him alone. He seems to believe what he says, and is rather abrupt and grumpy to boot. I finish my pint and bid him good night despite his assertions. As I leave, he fixes me with a glare, before holding up a single finger as a warning. I collect my coat and walking stick and depart the Ram's Head. As the cold night strikes my face, I realise that Wilf was right about one thing. A full moon shines overhead. Its light seems to gild the village silver, its stone walls and buildings framed with a white halo. I've had a few, that's for sure, and my vision warps a little as I make my way back over the stone bridge to the path leading back up through the valley. As I walk, I imagine the puritanical crowd baying for justice as they duck an old woman into the river that I can hear rushing below me. I shudder as the wind finds gaps between my clothing. Further along, I enter the pathway into the wood. The moonlight shines through the trees, rays catching mopes of moisture in the air. The branches around are losing their load, but the ground is littered, making it hard for me to follow the path. A little drunk, and with just the light of the moon to guide me, I stumble through, knowing that as long as I keep ascending, I'll emerge from the valley to the summit of the moor where my cottage lies. I'm glad of my walking stick keeping me steady. As I walk, Wilf's story returns to me. The thought of a lone woman, foraging in the woods, disturbed by the encroaching villagers, and then executed by their beliefs. If it was true, then I feel nothing but sympathy. I am so caught up in his words, I stop suddenly and look around. The wood looks unfamiliar to me. I've walked this path many times, but here I don't recognize. I must have taken a misstep on the way up. Not to worry, I'll carry on going uphill. The valley only leads to my house. The wind seems stronger here, as it whistles through trees and hisses through the remaining canopy. The forest seems older, the trunks more gnarled and bent with age. Exposed roots spring from the earth as they twist on the slopes to find anchor. I stumble, tripping over the vines. Grabbing my stick, I push myself up and dust myself down. For a moment, the wind seems to speak as it flows through the branches.
I see you.
It is indistinct to my ears, but I swear I can hear a voice on the breeze. Composing myself, I resume my walk. The land flattens and the trees thin a little. I must be nearing the top of the valley, but as I enter a glade, I stop in my tracks. A huge oak, one that I have never seen during my travels through these woods, stands alone in the center of the clearing. Its trunk thick and knotted, and its branches reach out in contorted angles above my head. The tips of fingers grasping in the turbulent air. I stand, open-mouthed, staring at this ancient oak in the heart of Autumn Valley as I am whipped by the wind. But then, just next to the trunk, under a low-hanging branch, what is that? I cannot make it out, a deeper shadow amongst the darkness. Moonlight does not seem to penetrate. It is still, unmoving, just seeming to stand next to the tree, looking at me.
I see you.
I hear the voice in the wind again, and I start to back away. The wind whips up around me to a gale, lifting the fallen leaves around me into a maelstrom of orange and brown. As I watch, they begin to gather, twisting into a tornado of vegetation, the funnel wide at the bottom and tapering into a spiraling point at the top, touching the branches of the ancient oak. It moves around the ground, as though searching for me, its tip feeling the bare branches above my head. I turn to flee, and as I run back to the edge of the glade, I look over my shoulder and see the shadow still lingering by the trunk. The leaf tornado blocks my path, and for a moment I am blinded as it whips me with its bronze it carries. I use my stick like a sword, waving it in front to ward off the stinging leaves, using my other hand to shield my face. I pick up my pace and change direction, and enter the undergrowth away from the glade. As I flee, I discard my stick. Instead, I begin to claw up the hill, pushing through the bushes, feeling my feet sink into the soft earth. I hear what sounds like laughter on the wind, echoing around my mind, laying claim to my sanity. I push through, and with a gasp of air, I find myself on the upper slopes of the moor. The moon is bright at the top of the valley, what thin wisps of cloud slice across its face, caught in the high winds. In the distance, I see my cottage, sat along the slope, and make towards it. To my right, the woods seem alive, with branches swaying and the autumn fall peppering the air like confetti. Shadows linger within. I cannot make them out clearly, but it is not hard to imagine the nightmare that the silhouettes represent. Out of breath, my heart pumping, I reach my cottage. I open the door and stagger inside, gasping to get oxygen into my lungs. I flick on the light switch, banishing the darkness around. As I look down at myself, my clothes are covered in dirt, along with my hands, as I'd grasped at the earth to escape. I stagger into my kitchen and retrieve a bottle of malt I keep in a cupboard, pouring myself a large one into a glass. My heart pounds as though it's about to explode in my chest. What have I just experienced? I swallow the whiskey to calm my nerves. Shaking, I slumped in my armchair as I processed tonight's events. Can I make sense of it? What madness has overtaken me? As my pulse calms, I close my eyes, inhaling deeply. I run through what just occurred. Had I imagined it? I must have, surely. Reason began to return to my initial confusion. I'd had a few drinks, heard Wilf's overly dramatic folk tale of a witch in the woods, along with his assertions about the timing, and then got lost on the way back. I knew better than most that the wind can make strange and unusual sounds when blowing through a forest, and I had just been caught in a small whirlwind that picked up the leaves. But what about the shadows? Did I actually see anything in them? Closing my eyes, I recalled the shadow stood in front of the huge oak. All I saw was a black outline, vaguely human-shaped. If I returned to that spot in the morning, no doubt I'd find it to be a tree stump on the exposed roots of a nearby fallen trunk. Wilf had got into my head, and I'd panicked. I finished the last of my whiskey, wincing as it goes down. As my pulse steadies, I decide to retire and bring an end to this startling evening. As I make my way upstairs, I feel foolish for allowing myself to be spooked by Wilf. I'd even manage to smile at my own gullibility. Flicking on the lamp in my bedroom, I change into my pajamas and throw my dirty clothes into a laundry basket, before nipping into my bathroom to wash my face and hands. Returning to my bedroom, I get into bed and pull the covers over. I breathe one final sigh, listening to the wind howling over the moors outside my window, as I reach over and turn off the lamp. In the dark of my room, my eyelids feel heavy as sleep approaches. On the edge of consciousness, I perceive a shadow in the corner, a deeper blackness. I narrow my eyes to discern what it may be.
I see you.